hidden in the pages of the book of Numbers is a small but very precious and crucial crystal, which is expressed here in Numbers chapter 11, verse 29, where Moses exclaimed, saying that, "Oh, that God, all of God's people be prophets," which is the subject of this afternoon's message. Moses desiring that all Jehovah's people would be prophets. This title contains three matters that we want to learn about this afternoon. First is the matter of being prophets. Who is a prophet? What do the prophets do? And how are they constituted? How do we practice, even in our days, prophesying, how to practice our prophethood? And also, the second matter is that Moses desired not just a few, not just himself, not just a few, but all God's people. All God's people would be prophets. This is quite special, that it is God's desire to have not just a few who would speak for him, who would be prophets, but all of God's people would be prophets. And then the third matter is the matter of the desire. God had this desire. Moses corresponded to this desire. And then we'll see in the New Testament, Paul also desired. Well, for this matter, to have all be prophets, becoming prophets, to prophesy, we need to have an earnest desire, an earnest seeking. Much learning, much training is needed. So I hope as we go through this outline, this message, these three matters will be made clear to us. Well, before we get to the outline, I would say this, that this matter of prophesying is, to my realization, my understanding, and my impression, is probably the greatest recovery in the Lord's recovery today. In the Lord's body, not only in our days, for the last 2,000 years, among the Lord's children, since the Apostle Paul spoke the word in 1 Corinthians 14, verse 26. When the whole church comes together, each one has a hymn, has a psalm, has a hymn, has a revelation. Each one has. And so when the church comes together, there should be this kind of mutuality, speaking in mutuality. Unlike today, in Christianity as a whole, is characterized by mainly one person speaking, the clergy class who speaks, and the rest listening. So since the apostle spoke that word in 1 Corinthians 14, in the last 2,000 years, I don't know of any Christian groups. There may be a few believers here and there, but I don't believe there has been any Christian body that has gotten into what the Apostle Paul spoke there in 1 Corinthians 14, and concerning the matter of prophesying, concerning the mutuality in speaking in the church meetings. It's not until, even among us, Brother Nee spoke about this back in 1937, again in 1948. He was so burdened about this matter. And in 1937, published under the publication, The Normal Christian Church Life, where Brother Nee he he presented that this matter of one man speaking and the rest listening is not according to the word. It's not God's way. If you study the Bible again, the New Testament, you cannot find anywhere telling us in a church meeting only certain one speaks and the rest listens. Yes, Paul spoke in the gathering. He spoke a long time, but that was not a church meeting. That was a ministry meeting. That was a ministry of the work. But in a church meeting, it is a meeting where all the saints speak in mutuality. So he was very burdened that the saints would realize this kind of abnormality shown in Christianity is not according to God's word. Then 11 years later, in 1948, in the messages of the training that he held, compiled later under the book, The Church Affairs, he repeated this matter even stronger by saying that this kind of practice, only have one man speaking and the rest listening, is according to the custom of the nations. And that is in our practice of the church life, that kind of a meeting, that kind of a practice needs to be thrown away, needs to be discarded. But of course, he was also aware, conscious that there was nothing else to replace it. So he realized we have been under a strong pressure of the tradition, still pressuring us to do the same thing as everybody else in Christianity. But this is not God's way. This is not what is shown in God's word. This is actually the custom of the nations. So he encouraged the saints, we have to keep pushing. It's just like going up a mountain. Keep pushing until we push this thing out. This was our burden within Brother Nee back in 1937, repeated in 1948. And then in 1984, due to the condition of the Lord's recovery, at that time, Brother Lee had the burden to go back to Taiwan to restudy the scriptural way for the believers to have meetings, to have service in the church life. And in that study, he discovered that for us to have a healthy church life, for us to build up the church, we have to take care of four things. First, we need to beget people, beget new ones through the gospel preaching. And secondly, after we have begotten new ones, we need to nourish them. We need to feed them by having home meetings with them. Then thirdly, after a period of time of this kind of feeding, we need to also teach them or perfect them by gathering with more saints to have a small group gatherings to carry out a kind of teaching and perfecting, that these saints not only are nourished, but they can learn. Then fourthly, that which he considered as the highest point, the peak of his study, that is, there needs to be all this, the gospel, the begetting, the nourishing, and the teaching should issue in the building up of the church. And this building up of the church is realized by the prophesying of the saints in the church meetings. This matter of prophesying is considered as the ultimate consummation, ultimate issue of the practice of the so-called God-ordained way or the scriptural way. So even as we are practicing this way as shown to us in the scriptures according to the way God ordained, we should keep this in view. Our preaching of the gospel, our feeding of the new ones, our teaching and perfecting of the believers need to need to have this as an issue, that the saints would learn how to speak, how to prophesy for God, for the building up of the church. According to 1 Corinthians 14, this is very